I want you to stay up for that long. Well, hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. So if you could find your way to your seats. All right. Well, hello. Welcome. My name is Elaine Armstrong. Oh, thank you. I don't know who did that. My name is Elaine Armstrong, and I serve as Vice President of Marketing for Goodwill of North Georgia. And we'd like to welcome you to our second Prosperity for All panel event. I'm not going to say annual because the last time we did this was in 2019, where we brought together Metro Atlanta leaders to discuss wealth disparity in our region. Our plan was to follow that up in 2020, but as you all know what happened, COVID happened. But as Winston Churchill says, never let a good crisis go to waste. So today, we have revived this event. We pulled together a collection of speakers and panelists who are committed to addressing our community's wealth gap and have personally invited all of you to help us to solve the reality of income inequality in Metro Atlanta. So during the event, we're going to invite you to use the hashtag ATLWorks and join us online for this conversation. So let's get started. If you haven't already started, you can, by the way, eat your salads. I see a few of you have already started that, so go ahead and enjoy that. But we're going to get started. And to set the tone for today's panel, I'd like to introduce you to racial wealth equity strategist, Latresa McLaughlin Ryan. And let me tell you a little bit about her. So Latresa is an experienced advisor who develops bold solutions for racial wealth equity and inclusive economic growth. She most recently served as the inaugural executive director for the Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative, a community-built, data-centered, intermediary nonprofit organization closing the racial wealth gap at the systems level through community wealth building strategies to create a shared prosperity for all. AWBI uniquely leverages national and international best practices, bold ideas, thought leadership, movement building, and strategic capital to create prosperity for Black people in Atlanta. Please join me in welcoming Latresa to the stage.
Thank you, Elaine. Good morning, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. Again, I'm a racial wealth equity strategist, formerly with the Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative, where now I focus on addressing the racial wealth gap by providing additional access and equitable access to capital and focusing on creating pathways for economic security and sustainable generational wealth. It is a pleasure to be with you all. Please eat freely as I share my remarks. Today, as we begin our discussion on creating shared prosperity for all, closing Atlanta's wealth gap, I have been asked to share a bit of context and set the stage for our conversation, which will center on control over your life and your destiny, and the ability to make choices and craft a future for yourself, your family, and your community. Addressing income inequality, however, is a critical component to establish a pathway to wealth, particularly when it's combined with intentional reparative policies, opportunities, and a healthy, thriving environment like we have here in Atlanta. The key is intention and action to create prosperity for all, as we will discuss today. The good news is Atlanta is thriving overall. Next slide. We are home to 31 Fortune 1000 and Fortune 500 companies, which had $517 billion in aggregated revenues in 2021. We have a strong network of post-secondary educational institutions, and our culture, energy, and dedication to this great city is unmatched. Next slide. And you may have heard Atlanta was also just named the best place to live in America by Money Magazine, which is, yes, outstanding news. And overall, Atlanta is also recovering well from the pandemic. Next slide. Since the pandemic began, the total employment is up 2%, and job postings are up 38.6% compared to before the pandemic began, making Atlanta one of the strongest cities in the recovery effort. Although our recovery trails behind markets like Austin and Dallas, where the total employment is up 7% and 4.3% respectively. Wages also overall are also up more than 6% since the pandemic began. However, they are below the national average of close to 8% and well below cities like Dallas, which had wages increase more than 13%. Housing prices are also rising rapidly, up 21% for housing, and rent is up 26%, which positively impacts property values as an asset, but deeply impacts affordability of Atlanta as a whole and how far our income will take us. Though prices are still low compared to cities like Austin, where housing prices are up 61%. While Atlanta has made some notable gains, they are all but wiped out, unfortunately, by the impact of inflation, which is rising locally at a rate among the highest in the country. Also, updated demographic data is needed to determine who is actually benefiting from these gains. We know people of color, particularly Black people, were most deeply impacted by the pandemic, as was the case with the economy and the intersection of every other systemic disparity before the pandemic began. Atlanta's long-standing economic realities in this respect cannot be ignored when assessing where we are and determining pathways ahead to ensure prosperity for all in what this discussion is about today. Atlanta is currently number 2 in income inequality, and we are near the bottom of the list in economic mobility. A child born into poverty in Atlanta has just a 4% chance of escaping it in his or her lifetime. Data shows us a common thread demonstrating the greatest disparities across the board, be it health, income, education, housing, or the criminal justice system, all exist between and have the greatest impact on African Americans nationally and in our city. Based on the most updated demographic data available by race, which is provided by the Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative, the median household income in Atlanta is $28,000 compared to close to $84,000 for white households. This compares to the national median Black household income at a little more than $48,000 compared to $78,000 nationally, where for white households, according to the 2021 census. Said another way, white households in Atlanta in recent years have fared better, and in some years far better than white households nationally, with Black households in Atlanta all well below the median compared to Black households nationally. This is where I make my plea, if I have a moment of privilege here, as some of the organizations here in the audience has experienced personally from me. This is where it's critical that we maintain and are intentional about collecting demographic data by race. Unless we truly are able to assess where we are, if we are meant to truly address the racial income and wealth gap properly, we will not be able to do so without the proper data so that we can make the distinctions about how our economy is growing and who is benefiting from it. It's expensive to do so. And collectively, though, I believe with the great efforts of Atlanta, as we've proven time and time again, we can make sure this essential data is available. Next slide. While it's my hope the local income numbers have shifted up, historical trends, as noted here, indicate. Next slide. Historical trends, as noted here, indicate there will still be a 20 to 30% gap in income, which in turn lead to huge gaps in wealth. So how do we get here? Next slide. Narratives persist, attributing the gap to, for example, behavior choices of how people of color spend their money. Other narratives attribute the gap to a notion that Black people, for example, are not eager to acquire education, which inhibits their ability to acquire wealth. Next slide. But the net worth of Black Americans with a college degree is 2/3 of the net worth of white heads of households with a high school diploma. While a bit higher, the net worth of Hispanic Americans with a college degree is also lower than white households with a high school diploma, demonstrating that education is valuable, particularly with a cradle to career framework, but education alone is not an antidote to equitable outcomes or reparative measures given the pervasive historical and structural policies that adversely impact people of color. Next slide. As James Baldwin stated, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced, which is why we're all here today. Thank you for coming again. The historical conditions of building wealth in this country are largely grounded by the labor and land holdings of Black and brown people. Slavery was the most profound economic engine for the foundation and continual progress of our economy. Institutions, endowments, and individuals benefit to this day from the contributions of slave labor and predatory practices that have impacted the descendants of enslaved people. In addition to the limitations of slavery, attempts of formerly enslaved and free Black Americans, for example, to garner wealth were largely followed by violence, seizure, and appropriation of land and resources from Black and Indigenous Americans. An example locally is the impact of installing I-20 through Black neighborhoods and the impact that it has had on wealth building in those communities. The Homestead Act is another example which forced Indigenous Americans from land they held for centuries to provide an economic mobility engine for largely white Americans. 45 million people still benefit from this program today. Similar to the Homestead Act, other policies such as the GI Bill and federal subsidy programs to assist people to become homeowners ultimately excluded Black and brown Americans. As demonstrated more recently, it is clear our economy and nation moves forward based on the services of essential workers that are also most often Black and brown and most often with the lowest pay. It is critical that we take intentional action to provide shared prosperity for all if we hope to have a truly robust economy. Next slide. Effective action will require a system of support to existing systems to change, effective action will require a system of support and changes to existing systems to adequately address the wealth disparities that exist, many of which we will discuss today. We have an incredible opportunity if we have the courage to lead the nation by example, to come together and continue with intention, as so many organizations represented in the room and on the panel continue to have or have begun to do so, to rebuild systems from the groundwater up to address the root causes of systemic racial wealth inequities to provide shared prosperity and justice for not only our region, but our nation. According to a report by McKinsey, if we do so nationally, we can increase national GDP by 1 to 1.5 trillion by 2028, and that will be here sooner than we think. I look forward to this timely discussion with you all today as we seize the wonderful momentum Atlanta is experiencing, so this great city may reach its highest heights where it belongs and serve as an international example of cultural, social, and economic growth and prosperity where all residents have equitable pathways to thrive. This is our time. Atlanta, more than any city that I have worked in, and I've done so nationally, has the tools in a very unique way. So now, Let's get it done and let's get to work. Thank you.
Let's give another round of applause for Latresa. And I want to thank her for setting the stage for today's panel discussion. So I am going to introduce our panelists, and a panelist, if you could do me a favor and enter the stage from that side and then sort of fill this seat, but leave this one for our moderator, if you will. So our first panelist probably needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. Mayor Andre Dickens is the 61st mayor of Atlanta, a proud native of Atlanta, and a product of Atlanta Public Schools. Mayor Dickens is focused on bringing opportunity and equity to the city that he so loves. He was sworn in January of this year, and his early accomplishments include making the city's first ever investment in early childhood education, the establishment of the nightlife division to address establishments with a history of crime, the reestablishment of the pothole posse to rapidly respond to residents' reports, and leading a successful coalition to keep Atlanta whole in opposition to a de-annexation effort. Goodwill of North Georgia is also very proud to call Andre one of our board members. Please welcome Mayor Andre Dickens to the stage. Our next panelist is Raphael Bostic. He took office on June 5th, 2017 as the 15th president and chief executive officer for the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. He is responsible for all of the bank's activities, including monetary policy, bank supervision and regulation, and payment services. In addition, he serves on the Federal Reserve's chief monetary policy body, the Federal Open Market Committee. The Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta serves as a 6th Federal Reserve District, which covers Alabama, Florida, Georgia, and parts of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Tennessee. The bank has branches also in Birmingham, Jacksonville, Miami, Nashville, and New Orleans. Please join me in welcoming Raphael Bostic to the stage. Representing for the ladies on the panel, that's right, Veronica Maldonado Torres is the newly appointed president and CEO of the Georgia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. As a highly versatile, visionary Latina business owner and community leader, Veronica brings her entrepreneurial spirit and tenacity, born from over 60 years of generational entrepreneurship on both sides of her family, to the Georgia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. With over a decade of experience as a small business champion and supplier diversity advocate, Veronica is a catalyst for growth for both small business and large corporations, bringing thought leadership and innovation to supplier development space. She has also been an avid champion for diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout her entire career. Please join me in welcoming Veronica to the stage. All right, and our next panelist, I really don't have to read it, but I am. It is our own Keith Parker, who is the president and chief executive officer of Goodwill of North Georgia. Whoop, whoop. One of the largest, one of the Southeast's largest retail and nonprofit organizations. Keith took the helm at Goodwill in October of 2017. And prior to transitioning into his leadership role at Goodwill, he served as the CEO and general manager of MARTA. Recently celebrating his 5-year anniversary with Goodwill, the organization has helped, get this, 96,700 people become gainfully employed and moved 44% of those people into a living wage during his tenure in the last 5 years. And I'm definitely going to say this part. He is also proud to work alongside the executive leadership team and the board, which we have many of our board members and our executive team here today that reflects the people that live in the areas that we serve. So please join me in welcoming my boss to the stage, Mr. Keith Parker. And last but finally, not least, because we could not have this panel discussion without a fantastic moderator, and we could not find anyone better than the woman who I'm going to bring to the stage. Rose Scott is going to moderate today's discussion. Rose, if you all don't know, and I know you all know, but she is an award-winning journalist and host of the Midday News program, A Closer Look, heard on Atlanta's NPR station 90.1 WABE. In her role as co-host and now host, Rose has interviewed foreign heads of state, cabinet members, U.S. ambassadors, numerous council generals, state and local elected officials, as well as civic and social leaders. Who has not been on Rose's show? A Closer Look has become a signature broadcast for the community and brings together viewpoints from all sectors of society. Please join me in welcoming our moderator, Rose Scott.
Thank you. She failed to mention I'm also a 3-time fantasy football champ at WABE, which is what's really important in this conversation. Thank you all. On behalf of WABE, I am Rose Scott, and we are once again just proud to partner with Goodwill of North Georgia to bring this very important conversation to the community. And of course, there is no magic solution. We know this because I've interviewed everybody on this stage except for Veronica, but we just booked her. So my streak is intact. And as we have this conversation, what I think is important, and so just give me this journalist privilege here. I know I've interviewed a lot of people in this room and I see some of the same faces. So I hope that these faces are going out and taking this information to help the other faces that we don't see, those faces that don't have the opportunity to be in a space like this. And often, and folks at WABE will tell you, I say no more than I say yes when it comes to doing a community event. Because for me, at the core is that, is the event going to impact folks who look like me and folks who may not have challenge, and folks who have challenges? So with Keith Parker, it's always a yes. So I'm honored to be here. And I will say that in all the years I've known Keith, and he's tagged me at all the different Goodwills, I have yet to find a perfect set of bookcases. I'm still looking for that, Keith. But you say they out there, brother, so I'm still looking. So let's get to this. As I mentioned, there is no magical solution, but I want to start with you, Keith, because we've had conversations before when we talk about closing this wealth gap and closing the income inequality gap. And then the pandemic hit. And so I want each of you to open with what you think the pandemic has highlighted, although for some folks, it shouldn't have been a surprise, but for some it was, what this pandemic has highlighted about the wealth gap or income inequality gap.
Well, first, welcome everyone. We're thrilled to have you here. I'm thrilled to have this august panel and just really honored and humbled to be in the presence of some of the great leaders of our region. And, you know, I think we sent Rose questions, but she never listens. And so she had to throw the haymaker to get us started. But what the pandemic did, you know, there have been a number of studies that indicated that Black wealth and Black family fortunes would be greatly impacted by a number of different things, and that the people who are going to lose out with the technological advances and a whole host of things were particularly Black males. What the pandemic did was rush that and pushed it up several years and really exposed folks to a whole host of information they didn't know about before. That when you look at how the pandemic impacted various cohorts and various groups, there were definitely winners and losers. Some of the winners, their net worth, income, a whole host of other things dramatically improved from the beginning of the pandemic to today. But there are other groups whose fortunes, health, even their mortality changed dramatically during that period. And Black families, Black males, Black females, particularly those with lower resources, were impacted the greatest. So the pandemic exposed more than I think any of us had known prior to, but prior to it hitting. And it also, and I loved what Latricia mentioned, that it also really highlighted the fact that we cannot go after this and say just a rising tide lifts all boats. There are specific individual ways we can go after the solutions to come up with ways that will have a dramatic impact on what's happening here in Atlanta and nationwide.
Thank you. Veronica.
Well, it's very similar to what Keith said. I mean, we saw that definitely in the Hispanic community. You know, the pandemic really highlighted the inequities that, you know, good or bad, we now see them, which I think is a positive part of the difficult situation that we've all been living through and the ability for us to do something specifically about it. You know, we saw a host of Hispanic businesses in particular that during the pandemic didn't have access to the resources necessary to make sure that they had access to PPP, that they had the education, the network to be able to help them get that funding necessary. We saw our Hispanic business community, you know, really struggling and, you know, looking at how education, income, and health are all intricately connected. And you cannot deny that those things all come together. So the challenge is finding ways to ensure that we are addressing the health issues that are impacting our minority community, that we are addressing the income inequality issues. And when you look at the Hispanic community specifically, we're definitely down the totem pole. Whether it's cultural reasons, whether there's education, barriers, and also access to those opportunities that we haven't had. And then also from the business side. So what we did see is that we saw a lot of folks move into this entrepreneurial spirit that comes with the resiliency of the Hispanic and I think the minority community in general. So while we saw a lot of impact in our communities, we saw these three things intricately woven and connected together. And now how do we address that employee health, community health, is business health, is society health, is our health overall?
Thank you. President Bostic.
Well, first of all, good morning, everyone. It's really an honor to be here on stage with such eminent people. You know, when I think about the pandemic, the way I think about this is that our society already had a number of areas where it wasn't working well for everyone. You've called out health, called out income and wealth. You can talk about access to broadband and technology, access to capital, information networks and participating in those. And what the pandemic did is it found all those weak spots and attacked them and made those challenges deeper and more painful and more disruptive. And it was so painful and disruptive, as you were saying, that people started noticing and saying, "Oh, wait a minute! Like if we're going to do basic things, we need to make sure that people have access to broadband. If we're going to do basic things, we need to make sure that all Latino businesses or Black businesses have a bank account." You know, and those were issues that had always been there, but hadn't risen to the level of collective awareness. So it's an opportunity, but opportunity means it's also a challenge, right? There's going to be work to be done, and there are going to be things that we're going to have to do to change those weak spots and put things in motion such that weakness eventually turns into strength. And I think that's what we're going to spend a lot of today talking about.
Mm-hmm. Mayor Dickens.
Yeah, in conjunction with, in addition to all that they've said, I'll add a lens to it on the public education standpoint. Think about our youth and the disparities that already existed in education based on the zip code that you're in, based on the economic status of the family. And then you have the pandemic occur, and now families that did not have internet, did not have laptops, or had only one laptop before kids, or had the lowest form of internet. So the laptops you were having were running slow, and you got 3 or 4 kids trying to Zoom into classrooms. And then, essential workers tended to be a lot of times individuals that were Black and brown or lowest income. When you consider these folks still had to go to work, the grocery store worker has kids too. And so their kids are left at home trying to navigate Zoom with grandma who doesn't know Zoom, who doesn't know when the Wi-Fi goes out, how to reset it. The things that challenged them beforehand challenged them greater and greatly during the pandemic. So we may, I'm hoping not, but we may have lost some ground in that lost in translation point of the pandemic. Instructors that I know, teachers that I know said sometimes they were talking to ceiling fans, talking to, kids just had their phones or computers up and you didn't know if they were behind it or not. They were ashamed of their backgrounds, ashamed of, this was before Zoom put in the blurry or the fake screen thing that we use now where we don't want people to know what our background look like. Because y'all be at the beach trying to take calls. But at the beginning of this thing, you couldn't conceal that you live in a room with 4 other kids and that your house has, things that are unsightly. So you just log off.
Yeah.
You don't show up, or you point it up towards the ceiling. And so I'm just highlighting that the disparities that we had going into this, made people have more despair. And so some folks just left and exited those structures that were the places of stability for them. And luckily, through a lot of hard work with APS, a lot of these nonprofits and God's good graces, we've brought some of that back in and helped them get on the right track.
We're going to talk about solutions in a moment. And by the way, we'll take questions from the audience a little bit later. In her slideshow, Latricia talked about, she said, this is our time. Atlanta has the tools. Before we talk about those tools, and I'll start with you, Mayor Dickens, but are we at a crisis level when we talk about this wealth gap that it is inconceivable perhaps to say we can get this closed within 4 years, 8 years? It's kind of like, I have a joke, like which will be finished first, the Beltline or Planet Vogel, but I don't know. Is there a timeline? Are we at a crisis level?
We are at a crisis level right now, and we have a timeline that we can get it back on track. And that's not just the general optimist in me. That's someone who's looking at trends that got us into this condition from 2010 to now. Housing costs increased somewhere around 70%, but people's incomes that are in the working class only increased by 10%. So that was the chart. Part of the chart that Latrice showed is the cost of living has gone up, but the livable wages haven't. And so as long as we have a $7.25 national minimum wage, a $5.15 minimum wage in the state of Georgia, as long as we have people making these low incomes, we are going to have a challenge. As was mentioned also in her stats, other cities have had income increases higher than we have, but yet our housing costs have increased greatly. And inflation is high. And so I think that what we have to do is really double down on our workforce development programs, our training, things that, Keith and I, TechBridge and Goodwill started a technology career program that trains people. ATC here trains people, whether they get we want folks to get these 4-year college degrees, et cetera. But at the same time, the market is moving. It is moving quickly. And so we have to be quick in getting people to living wages. And so that's how we'll curb this by 8 years.
Okay, so I want to stop you there because you mentioned 2 things. You said housing and you said a livable wage. Raphael Bostic, I want to come to you because you all just told us not too long ago that Atlanta, in terms of housing, is unaffordable. So even with the great programs that Keith Parker has and initiatives from the city and other organizations, if folks cannot afford to live here in this region, can you even expect this wealth gap to close. So the housing question comes to you. What's key in trying to solve Atlanta's housing crisis?
Well, thank you for the question. You know, housing is essential. If you don't have housing, if you don't have stable housing where you can be sure you're going to be able to put your head on a pillow in the same place every day for weeks and months at a time, you're not going to invest in your health. You're not going to invest in your education. You're not going to be able to focus on your children to make sure they're doing the things that they can be better off. So this is an essential issue. You know, Atlanta's housing problems are, on some level, they are a byproduct of its success, right?
Sure.
So the basic economics, and I'm an econ guy, so I can't help it, and I promise you're going to understand this. When you have high demand and you have low supply, prices go up.
Mhm.
That's all you need to know,
Right.
right? And Latricia mentioned Atlanta's got a ton of growth here. We got Fortune 500 companies moving in here. We've got startups all over the place. A lot of capital is here. People understand and people know Atlanta is the best place in America to live. And because of that, if you don't have housing being produced at rates that are equal to the rate that people are coming here, the price is going to go up. So our challenge is to create an infrastructure such that the construction and supply side is robust, strong, and deep enough so we can produce the number of units in the time frame that matches the number of people that are coming here. And the city hasn't been doing that. And this is not a new issue. So, you know, just as we were saying, as I said earlier, Atlanta was having affordability issues in many neighborhoods before the pandemic.
Mhm.
And the pandemic has really just exacerbated. And it really comes down to, can we get enough units built in time to meet the elevated demand that's going on? I'll just say one other thing on this. We also need to recognize that developers are going to build to their highest and best use, unless they have an incentive to do something otherwise. So highest and best use, that means expensive properties, expensive units. You're going to build high rises and condos and all those sorts of things because that's where you're going to get your largest profit margins. The ways that does not happen involve public policy, and it requires people like the mayor and the city council and the planning commission and others to have a voice and really project a vision as to how they want development to happen. And that as we develop, we need to make sure there are units that are made available for all Atlantans at all income levels. And that will require effort and leadership and vision. And you know, we just see this, and this is just basic economics. This is not a complex story, but that's really where we need to go.
Okay. All right. So you mentioned public policy. Bear with me, Keith and Veronica. Mayor Dickens, public policy. And again, President Bostic is right. This is not a new issue for your administration or the administration before or two administrations before. It goes way back when Mayor Jackson was mayor. Just quickly, can you talk about what initiatives you all have coming out of your administration to address housing affordability?
Yeah, I mean, this is top 2 or 3 issues of my administration. The goal is to build 20,000 units of affordable housing and do so quickly. We're working with everybody, all the partners. Basically, we created a housing strike force, which is to look at every piece of public land that we have, land that's owned by APS, by MARTA, by Atlanta, by the Beltline, by Invest Atlanta, of course, by Atlanta Housing Authority. We have a couple thousand acres if you add them all together. And that land is land that we can build mixed income housing on, that we also can build amenities around so people can have, grocery stores, schools, et cetera. So it's not these isolated places of concentrated poverty that they used to be. Also, the inclusionary zoning policy that we put forth some years ago has really taken hold around the Beltline and then also on the west side now. And we're going to expand that in some areas where we're doing more investment in the city. So you'll see inclusionary zoning means that we require developers to set aside 10 to 15% of the units for affordable housing. So that's policy, as Dr. Bostic mentioned, making sure that we have policies in place that require some level of affordability. And we also have to charge to make sure that we are aiding in that by providing bonds and capacity for developers to place affordability within the units for our police officers, firefighters, school teachers. All that is going to produce some housing, a lot of housing. But the demand on the city of Atlanta, people are coming here in droves. So one thing about affordable housing is we're going to do our housing part. It's still the affordability part. Affordability has to do with incomes. So we're not going to we can't catch up with just building alone. We're going to have to make sure that we get people above $10 an hour. I mean, this is just a crisis that we have to also overcome. So we're going to do construction. That takes a long time. We got about 1,600 units right now that we built already in this first year. 4,000 are under construction or in some form of funding. So we're going to hit the number. The challenge is making sure that people have incomes so that they can graduate out of these affordable housing subsidized programs.
So let's talk about, did you want to add something, President Bostic?
No, I was going to say exactly where the mayor ended, which is affordability is a ratio. It's your housing costs over your income. So you can address this by reducing your housing costs or increasing your income. And we should really recognize, as you just said, that that income piece should be in the conversation. That's an essential element as well.
So when we talk about incomes, Keith Parker, I'll come to you because you are in a space where you all are working to train people to get into jobs where they can have a livable wage. Okay. But there are some challenges that you all face too, because you have to stay engaged. This is where I want to get into private and public partnerships, because I've been in the city a long time, and every time I turn around, somebody says, oh, it's going to take a public-private partnership. And then you ask people, well, what does that look like? And they go, I don't know. We're going to do this. So what does that look like? What does a public-private partnership look like to increase wages?
Asking, how many of you have either shopped at or donated to a Goodwill? I mean, the guy even dropped his plate. He had to raise his hand so vigorously. And typically when I ask that question, I follow up with, and how many of you know what we do with the profits? So this group is a well-educated group. So it doesn't work as well, but typically, even earlier this week, I was in this very room and asked that question of about 100 and some odd people, and about 6 people raised their hands saying they knew what we did with the profits. So we take the profits we make from the retail stores and invest it into workforce development. And we do it what we call the ABC approach: a job, better job, career. And as Elaine mentioned during the introduction, we've been able to work with more than 5,000 employers over the last several years in helping move people from poverty or moving people in some cases from total unemployment to employment, better employment, and onto the middle class. So in this 5-year period, we've moved just about 37,000 people from poverty, families from poverty into the middle class. And we've done it by working with groups like Home Depot, like Coca-Cola, all these major employers, and then with like the Atlanta Technical College, a whole host of other groups to give people all the services they need to be successful. But it is hard, and it's getting harder. The barriers that are in front of people to be successful are more significant than ever. And I think the single biggest barrier is the barrier of poverty itself, because poverty is almost like having a permanent disability, that a person who is impoverished, there are more challenges that face that person than any of us even think about, that just the very basic things can be life-changing. So when Rose mentioned, it was an off-the-record conversation, so I won't bring it up. We talked a little bit earlier about how the smallest thing that can impact, say, $20, $30 a month on a person who's in poverty's income, it can have devastating impacts. So when we think about solutions, we really need to be thinking about how the major employers, the small employers, government, others of us can work together to help remove those barriers and acknowledge those barriers that people who find themselves impoverished, what we can do to help them get out of those situations. One example at Goodwill. So we help, as mentioned, over 100,000, close to 100,000 people find jobs over the last few years. One of the major barriers to sustainable employment is transportation. So we partnered with Lyft and Uber so that while people are in our training programs, and even the first couple of weeks while they're on their new job, they get free transportation provided by Lyft and Uber. Because if you tell people, all right, we got this great job for you, we got all the other elements, but I can't get you there or get you back home, you may as well tell them to walk to the moon. So we have to intentionally go about removing all those barriers that get in the way.
By the way, I'll say it, he wouldn't say it. The conversation was regarding, and my producer Pat and Daniel, they're here, they can tell you, we get emails all the time. And someone emailed me saying, what's the big deal about the utility company adding $14 extra a month for your light bill? And my answer was, for some people, that $14, that's a big dent in their budget. It may not be a big dent to you, emailer, but it's a big deal to that household. That's a MARTA card for some folks. So that's what the conversation was about. I want to get this into, speaking of emails, because I did get an email from someone who said that we need to do more on my show to talk about challenges for people who are returning to society from being incarcerated. That's a big part of this too. Does Goodwill, you all have programs for folks who are returning to society?
Absolutely. Huge programs, in fact, very successful programs. What we have found is that the single biggest determinant of a person not returning to the criminal justice system or back into a life of crime or what have you is having a sustainable job. So our goal is to work with a number of different jails, prisons, and whatnot. So we start the training program several months before they're scheduled to be released, so that the day they come out of prison, out of jail and whatnot, they're already employed. Mm-hmm. The gangs hire 24 hours a day. We need to have employers out there doing the same thing.
Yeah, that's good. Veronica, I want to talk about the women. Time now to talk about us women. We both know, and y'all may know, it is estimated 5 million women may have left the workforce during this pandemic. That's 5 million households that are greatly impacted. When you look at initiatives or programs that can work specifically for women, women of color, Latinas, what do you think is crucial there? What's critical when we talk about focusing on households led by women?
We've definitely seen that huge retraction in the marketplace from ladies leaving the workforce. But I do also have to say that, the childcare issue has been a huge issue, and especially for our minority communities, we are also seeing that intergenerational family dynamic at home and what the pandemic really has impacted in the progress. What I also want to highlight, however, is that we have seen, because of access, flexibility, and opportunity, a lot of our Latina women that are starting businesses 6 times faster than any other group in the nation start businesses. And that has been something that has allowed them to, provide for themselves and their families and have that flexibility. Programs that we've been putting in place, we have 3 specific programs that we're managing at the Georgia Hispanic Chamber through our Hispanic Business Center. And thanks to federal funding that was truly unleashed, and we're managing those funds in a way where we can provide technical assistance and the financial acumen, which is when we're talking about income inequality and wealth creation and wealth building. I mean, it's around the knowledge around how to manage your personal finances and how to navigate how to navigate the American system, especially for the Hispanic community. So when I see about, programs that are really dealing with the root causes and ensuring a pathway, we're looking at an immigrant community and Latinas and women in general, and we're seeing women across the board starting businesses, not just Latinas, where that flexibility piece is really critical. But the other component on broadband access is truly huge, right? Because if you don't have the access to broadband to be able to start that business, then we're in trouble. We've seen programs really focus. I'd love to see the resurgence and the focus on empowering women. I come from a strong line of Latina women and all kinds of women. My Latina woman is in the group tonight, so shout out to her. 40 years ago from coming to this country and starting a new life. But the one thing that I'll say is the resilience of women to provide not only for themselves and their community and their children. We need to continue to bring programming that is meeting women where they are on demand and on their own time. And I think that if we can do that, as well as giving the access to the capital, which we've seen, we've provided over $150,000 in access to capital and microloans through many incredible partnerships. Because we're still seeing the Hispanic community specifically only get access to 2% of the loans. But thankfully, initiatives with Invest Atlanta and others are helping us mitigate that. When I think about 2% of Hispanic businesses surpass $1 million in annual revenue. Just gonna let that sit for a second. We talk about access, opportunity, and unleashing the possible. And when we talk about wealth creation for our Latina women in our community, we need to truly focus on unlocking and giving them the education. And that's what we're doing. And that's what we need to continue to do for women. I don't know if I'm going to get a question because I've been hanging out with the boys up here for a minute. So I'm taking the moment, I'm just saying, seizing the moment to really talk about, and hopefully we can get to that, around unlocking education access for people that are here ready to work. And we're experiencing a really tough time in getting access to workers, whether it's having the right skill sets or having bodies in place, but education is the key, but it's not always possible for everybody. So we need to continue to work on unleashing those educational opportunities.
Well, and it starts with early childhood, and you just announced a $5 million initiative. Well, let's get into education. You good? No, it's okay. No, it's okay. All right. You're a product of APS, but you went to Georgia Tech. That's all right. Let's talk about education. You spend time playing ball, hooping with the kids. You have conversations with them about education. What are they telling you? Are they engaged?
Yeah, they're engaged. First of all, happy Hispanic Heritage Month, as Veronica just did her thing just a little while ago. Very thankful for her leadership in the city and being a part of my transition team and supportive. So think about it like this. Our youth need us now so much. And that's why I started an initiative to set a goal of $20 million investment into early childhood education. This is the first time that the city of Atlanta as a city is going to get in the early childhood education business. I learned a lot. Oh yeah, well, let's clap for that. $20 million. We set that goal in April. I learned a lot from Gears and the PAC movement. I see Brittany over here and so many others that have said we got to make sure that we get these youth ready for even APS. So infancy matters. The youth, these kids hear less words in certain households than others. They don't get as much exercise and community building. And so now we're raising $20 million. I put forth $5 million from the city's budget with the help of the city council, Matt Westmoreland here. And then we got $5 million from United Way and the Whitehead Foundation. And then we just got $5 million today. We announced it from APS. So in a short amount of time, we've raised $15 million. And I came here today with collection plates to get the other $5 million from each of you. I'm gonna shake y'all down. Each table ought to come up with about $100,000 by the end of this meeting. But we're gonna hit that number so that we can prepare youth for, in 8 years they'll be in let's say third grade, and we know third grade reading scores set the tone for graduation. And so today, we are bookending some wonderful things with APS. $5 million investment that they gave today to get us to 15 million towards 20 million. And then they hit an 84% graduation rate yesterday, the highest graduation rate in Atlanta Public Schools history. We just hit that as an announcement. So education, when you are the best city in the United States and you got a great graduation rate. Now we have to start make sure we get a pipeline, and that's why I'm investing in early childhood education.
Well, we've talked about housing, we've talked about income, we've talked about the fact that education is key. But as a question that I get all the time, is this something that we can policy or legislate our way out of? And then we go to, do we start with the federal? Is this an issue that has to start at the national level? President Bostic, I'll let you start with this answer. Do we start there? You all have great initiatives here locally, but nationally, what's missing?
So I'm going to answer a different question.
Why don't you answer my question?
Can we do that?
No.
You do that all the time. Come on now.
I would have.
So
You've been on the show about 6 times. You know good and well you can't deflect.
Do it. I
I
got you back.
get to the 7th, it sounds like. Look, this is an all-hands situation. And we need parties from every corner of our society to be thinking about ways that they can contribute to moving us forward. And the precise combination of bodies and institutions that are going to take leadership roles is actually going to depend on who's on the ground and who can do the things that you need to have done. Elaine mentioned earlier, I oversee a 6-state district, and I've traveled to every corner of these states, and I can tell you, in different cities and different towns and communities, the set of players who are going to be the partners that are actually going to make that progress is just going to be different. And so we all need to be very sensitive about who in the community is positioned to make contributions, who has the vision, who has the credibility to get people to come to the table and be real when they get there. And that's a challenging thing. So, we have something at our bank called the Southern Cities Economic Initiative, where we're trying to engage with cities across the Southeast to say, you need to think about how you're going to build your community to move things forward. And we're going to do this at a cohort level to try to facilitate conversations so that you can build a strategy that has a hope of working. Because if you just pick 5 institutions, throw them in a room, that's not necessarily going to get it done. And so in some instances, the federal government will be a partner because they'll have someone to plug into, or there'll be a representative who's taken this on as one of their issues, and they can move that forward. In other places, there are going to be federal officials who have decided they have other priorities. And, one of the things I learned very early in my career, a mentor told me this: you work with the willing. Like, if you try to drag people who aren't really that interested into the room and to do something, they may show up, but they're not going to get the things done that you are going to need them to do. And so it's that kind of assessment that's going to be really important for everyone to take on, to decide how you're going to design a strategy that's going to work.
But if it's a national issue, and if more than half of America's households are living paycheck to paycheck, used to be 74%, I think it has dwindled a little bit. And if, according to UC, now you look this up, UC Berkeley economist Emmanuel Saez, you might know him, he says, look, America's top 10% now average more than 9 times as much as the bottom 90%. That's an issue. And if 64% of the nation believe that the federal government needs to lead the way in closing this wealth gap, do you see that you're not saying it's not important, right? I just want to be clear.
So everybody's important.
Okay. What role does the federal government, or should they play in it?
So the federal government's going to have to decide that, right?
Okay.
So this is not something that someone in the Federal Reserve is going to say, you all need to get up and do these 4 things. What we do, what I do, is when I see there are challenges, when I see there are constraints that are preventing Americans from being their full selves, I go to the policymakers and say, I'm seeing this as a problem. You mentioned childcare. We cited very early on in the pandemic that a bunch of childcare institutions were collapsing, and that the federal government needed to be aware of this and decide if it was something they were going to step into. We mentioned that small businesses across the Southeast were finding challenges in terms of accessing capital. And I went to policymakers and said, you guys need to think about, is this a gap you need to fill? So for me, I think I'll say this. Politicians, our elected leaders, respond to the incentives that they receive. And if they go at places and they hear repeatedly that X is a problem, they're going to have X in their mind more often. So if it's about education, if it's about broadband, these are collective problems, and they're going to require collective solutions. So we all are going to have to decide as citizens of the country, like, how are we going to contribute to setting priorities such that people at the federal government, people at the state government, people at county level are going to make that their priority.
And you know I wasn't picking on you, right?
Oh, no, I know.
Don't y'all tweet that Rose Scott was picking on Raphael Bostic.
So, the federal government has its role, but, I'll tell you about Atlanta specifically. Atlanta, to me, is a group project. Atlanta is a group project. You cannot lay it at the feet of government, lay it at the feet of the nonprofits, or lay it at the feet of the corporations. It's a group project. All of us have to be in on it. Like you said, for the solutions to come to fruition, for us to be able to deliver what we need to. And so this group project requires everybody to put in. So at times when government wasn't building affordable housing, that was hurting the group project. Now we're building affordable housing. If corporations were only hiring talent from outside of the city and not cultivating talent within the city, then you were causing your own gentrification that then you had to price up to try to solve for, but still couldn't get there. So you have to treat this like an ecosystem, which it is. And so that's why the nonprofit sector, the faith leaders, everybody putting in on this is going to get us out of this in a rapid way. Otherwise, if you don't put in on it, it's going to take us that much longer to get where we're going. So now we have leadership aligned to where we have a shared vision, so we will deliver better, faster, and more efficiently. And I think that's where we are today.
Well, how do you do that? And I'm going to ask you, since you're an elected official, how do you do that and still navigate people's political ideologies, which sometimes monkey up the system and the process?
I mean, that's, so you set the goal, and then you got to dance around all these landmines. You still got to fill the potholes. You still have to go out here and pick up the garbage. And then somebody does a policy that changes the way people use guns, or changes the way certain other things happen. Well, you just got to dance around that. You got to move around that. You can rally, and you can try to find common ground. So for me, as I always state, I draw circles, I don't draw lines. But then my chief operating officer, Lisa Gordon, said, "Now, Mayor, a line has a circle has a diameter and a radius. We're gonna have to draw a line on this one." I said, "Yeah, you're right. We're gonna draw a line today." And that was on Wellstar. I say stuff. I say names. Anyway, they got a line drawn on them. But when it comes to the things that we're talking about, this is, hey, there's certain political ideologies that are slightly different. So you find the 80% of the things that you can agree to, like business and, education, et cetera.
Yeah, I was coming to you, Keith. Go ahead.
To answer your question, we can't wait for the federal government. The one thing we haven't talked about today, and I know Andre has been laser focused on it, is that there is something broken in our young and somewhat and going into their 30-year-old adults. Something broke during the pandemic that's causing a wave of violence against one another that simply requires a level of urgency that we can't wait. So what do we need to do to calm this violence down? I think one of the solutions is giving people a way out, giving people a path. And that path to a good job is going to be that thing that can be that calming influence. And so Fortune 500 companies, we got tons of them, as Latricia mentioned. We've got a ton of wealth in this region. We've got a Chamber of Commerce that is engaged in this topic. We've got political leaders who are engaged in this topic. And we've got lots of you out here who are engaged. If we can't solve it in Atlanta, and we're the best place in America in which to live, where will we solve it?
I would like to add something to
I
that.
want you to, yeah.
So, when I hear this question often, I think about, who's the number one employer of our communities, and it's small business. And when we talk about, increasing the minimum wage or what should be done policy wise or not, I think about what is the best way to help and support our community and our businesses. So when we have this conversation, I also think about, my gosh, businesses are going through a lot. We've got inflation, we've got lower margins, we've got a lot of things going on that are impacting them from being able to make that type of investment. But there is a solution we should be having a conversation about. How do we, when we give tax credits for keeping them employed, how do we consider maybe a workforce investment or more? I know that our local communities are really focused on that and from a statewide perspective, but I think that there is something there that we truly need to dig deeper on so that we can immediately support those that, number one, employ the majority of our folks, and number two, have folks that need to be reskilled, have folks that need that support so that they can raise their quality of life.
Quality of life. Go ahead.
Yeah, can I just, so I totally agree with that. And
That's a good day when you agree with me. I'm just, that's it.
Then you
Can y'all tweet that?
you have a lot of good days, I'm guessing. So to do this well and to do this at scale requires an infrastructure, right? And so one of the things that we've tried to do is help regions figure out that infrastructure. We have a partnership with the Markle Foundation and the National Urban League called the Rework America Alliance, where we are trying to get employers, educational providers, and the community to be connected. So they're aware of where there are good jobs. There's a pathway for people to get the skills to fill those jobs, and employers know where to look to find people that have those jobs. And so we're working with Goodwill here, and we're working across the country to try to get this to be much more institutionalized. Because right now, the way this works is I know you, I meet you for lunch, and we set up a one-side conversation, and that's like 3 companies or 5 or however many, and it's not an institutional thing. This needs to be something that can run on its own, and these relationships happen at a different level so that, if one of us moves out of town or something, it keeps going, right? And that's the essential thing. So I totally agree, and we need to be paying attention as to how we institutionalize these things.
And there were some populations that we didn't even get to talk about, our returning veterans, our unsheltered, our trans community. There's so many, but I'm not gonna ask all the questions, but some of y'all have questions. Stand up, introduce yourself, and ask your question. Oh, we have mic runners. Okay. All right.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Clyde Mize. I'm a lawyer here in town. Appreciate the robust conversation. Keith mentioned the 20-something to early 30-something. Let's bring it back just a little bit more. What about those preteens to those folk who are not quite 20? I have young children, 17 and 12. I think it's important for us to provide opportunities for those young people when the summer gets hot, right? During spring break, during their vacations. What kind of conversations are you having within your spaces or with partners to make sure that those young people actually have opportunities as well?
Man, that's a fantastic question. Youth is my thing, right? I got to do all the other stuff we do as a mayor, but that's where my heart is. I think about my daughter, she's 17, and her, how blessed she was to, have the life that we have. But then I think about all the other individuals that's actually, trying to make money to help feed their families. When you see these young people out here, sometimes doing some of the things they're doing, they're actually trying to solve a demand issue. Their families have more month than money, and they're trying to add to it. So this summer, I had the mayor's summer youth employment program, where the goal was to hire 3,000 youth and make sure they were paid around $15 an hour. The city of Atlanta hired several hundred of them, close to 1,000, and 100 employers hired the rest. And we hit the goal, and we'll be making announcements about that soon. But that was a way to where this summer youth crime was down 20%. So youth crime and reports of water boys on the street. Now, we all got long memories in Atlanta, and I talk about this all the time. If you see one, you're like, that's every day. It's all bad. that's oh my God, they're killing people at Lennox, and there's water boys everywhere. And there's da-da-da. That's how we talk to each other because we don't ever forget a bad news day. But the truth of the matter is, it's actually down, youth-related crime, because we gave them a lot of opportunities to work for your companies and your nonprofits, and they were happy to get that experience. And so we want to do that now, off season, not just in the summer. We want to do it throughout the year as interns or as apprentices, or allow them to come after school on the weekends or holidays, et cetera. So keeping that going is something we're trying to do. And a lot of that, we use American Rescue Plan money from the Biden administration to supplement, some nonprofits or small organizations that couldn't afford the $15 an hour for another employee, but had a great opportunity. So we paid for that. And so we took water boys off the street to teach them on entrepreneurship. So those are some of the things. And then midnight basketball was one of the things that we did to really put people in a good space, and that really produced positive outcomes for the youth. It didn't solve all the problems. Everybody didn't stay out of trouble, and everybody didn't take advantage of it, but enough did for us to know that it was the right thing to do, and that we must scale it even more next year.
So I'll never forget when I was in 8th grade. Where'd you go? I lost you. Oh, here you are. Okay. When I was in 8th grade, I had the opportunity to shadow a major broadcasting company here locally. And I will never forget the impact that had on me personally, to be able to shadow a professional of something that I could potentially envision myself for the future. And I think we need to continue to do more of that in a younger age. I think we need to be teaching entrepreneurship at a much younger age. I think what we've been seeing, and we've been supporting legislation at the chamber through our legislative advocacy efforts to make sure we have internship, apprenticeship programs. We have 3 high school students right now from Cristo Rey in Atlanta, from the city of Atlanta, coming and hanging out with us. They come Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. They spend the full day with us all for 9 months, until the end of May. And I cannot imagine what these young folks are experiencing with us and what they will do with what they have learned. But we need to be doing much more of that across the board. So a whole focus on making sure that we are giving them access, opportunity, and connection so we can, and that's our theme, reimagine the next for our communities. And that's really what we need to do. So thank you for that. I'm a mother of a 6-year-old and a 13-year-old, and I wake up at night thinking about what does the future look like, and do they have the skill sets necessary to perform where we need them to? Because the jobs of today are not the jobs of the next 2 years. So we got work to do.
Another question? Oh,
Hi, my name is Melissa, and I run a nonprofit called SOS. My question is for Keith. Mr. Parker, I would like to know, in the next 5 years, what do you see Goodwill offering jobs and trades for, I guess I say green space jobs?
Excellent question. So another Goodwill plug here, shameless, by the way. When you shop at Goodwill and buy like just one pair of jeans from Goodwill, it takes about 2,000 gallons to produce one pair of denim jeans. So when you buy them from Goodwill, you're saving the environment. You're doing a whole host of things. But we're working with a number of different employers who, and providing some level of training now that incorporate green philosophy, incorporate sustainable philosophies, incorporate sustainable technology in those job spaces. We've got a number of different programs that people can join very early on, train for 6, 8, 12 weeks, and come out ready for employment. So be glad to talk to you about some of those opportunities offline, but Goodwill is hugely into the green space piece as well.
I just want to jump in before we get to the question. If you're in an organization where you can have a group of young folks come in, even if it's just one day, do it. I just had a group from South Georgia. It was a private school, and they were all boys, and they were all white, about 99% white. And the administrator told me it was important for those boys to come out of their community, come up to Atlanta, and see Atlanta. And she's been emailing me and saying these boys just had a blast. We gave them all hats, talked to them about broadcasting. You never know whose mind you're going to impact. So if you can do it, do it. Just take one day. Do it. Keith will come speak to him. Andre will come speak to
Yeah.
him.
Can I just, to her question on green jobs, we have a new chief sustainability officer that just started, Chandra Farley. Look her up, look at the city. Yeah, you can clap for that. And I made her a cabinet level position. So Chandra Farley, look her up. We have green jobs throughout, the system of Atlanta that she can talk to you about that, you may want to get your youth involved in, which would be great.
Question.
Hi, yeah. Thanks again. Been a great panel to listen to. So my name is Rayanne Alves, and I had my question around when we talked about getting to a livable wage. I didn't hear the other side of that. So if you raise the costs that are associated, how do we bind or stop then the next step for the corporations? Because at the end of the day, the U.S. is capitalist. How do we stop them from then raising their prices, which then makes it quite circular?
You want to handle that economy?
You want to handle it,
Economist,
Mr. Economist? I'm the
You
economist.
saw everyone look to the middle
Culture.
of the stage.
Make sure you have a good culture.
Culture matters.
Yeah.
It does. Look, I think that the marketplace can work, but it requires everyone to really feel like they are fully active and have a real shot to be part of that marketplace. For businesses, I talk to a lot of business leaders, and what they tell me is if they had to choose between market share and a margin per unit, they choose market share, right? So I've not met business leaders who are just like, let me just raise the price. I don't care if I lose 3, because they're hoping for a repeated experience, right? And if you go to a store and you're like, there's nothing here for me, then you're never gonna come back, right? And so there is this tension that business leaders face in terms of making decisions about how they're going to run their business, how they're going to create a customer experience, and how they're going to be part of the community. Now, if the costs go up a lot, right, business leaders are going to say, look, I got to stay in business, right? So I need to make sure that the price is sufficiently placed so that I have a margin and I can pay all my workers, I can pay my rent, and I can have food to eat. But most businesses I talk to don't feel like they have so much power that if they just go crazy and raise the wage to anything, that people are still going to come in. So I think that is a perspective. I actually thought you were going to ask a different question, which is, I go to a lot of community meetings where people will say, you want to raise the minimum wage. That is a direct cost to small businesses. You are directly squeezing their margins, and you're going to force them either to hire fewer workers or go out of business. That's what I thought you were going to ask. That's actually a hard problem. I should let Veronica speak more on this, but there is a tension in all of these things. And what's important, and maybe I'm becoming Mr. Democracy up here, these are things that communities need to have conversations about, figure out where their values are, figure out which problem they think is the bigger problem, and find that pathway or that space such that we are addressing what we have collectively decided is the biggest issue. And that's another one that I think it's good to have these conversations, get people in a room. And the last thing I'll say on this is I have been remarkably struck. I got a big area that I go to. Every town I go to, the people who live there, they all want the same thing. They want to be able to have a good job. They want their place to grow. They don't want to feel like they're on the precipice. They want to feel like their children have a chance to grow up in the same place where they are. Like, these are basic things. Mm-hmm. And so if you can get everyone to start in that space, and remind that we're not arguing about the goal, we're arguing about how you get there. Like, that's a different kind of conversation. And in many debates that you see on TV, for example, I think that gets lost. I think we lose sight of what we're actually trying to accomplish, and it causes us to get distracted on things that actually don't matter. And we need to make sure we stay focused on the things that matter so we can actually make the change that we need.
Blessings. I'm Olivia Maxwell. I'm the Executive Director for On the Rise Community Development Center. My question is, and I want to applaud everyone who's on the panel today. What I've heard a little bit about is the education, but what I'm also seeing is a large lack of centralization. And how do we create the circle you're speaking about, Mayor, whereby when someone has a need, then it's circled in through one funnel. We're all funneling intakes from so many different avenues and areas, and everyone has to repeat the same story. And it seems that there needs to be a unification. And so, for instance, if I come and say I need services, when I come into this one portal, I'm then directed to all the other avenues around the circle that are going to help me in the village. How do we do that, and when is that going to happen?
Good question.
Yeah, that's you're speaking my love language from 2017 TechBridge talks. That's what we were talking about, is how to have no wrong door, a centralized place where you bring your problems there, and then you find the level of providers. Because what happens is, if you're experiencing homelessness, you're also hungry. You also have a challenge with childcare. You're also having an issue with finding your health provisions that you need. And so, but when you show up at this place and they say, well, tomorrow you can go find you another place, and you don't have transportation, you got to go around 6 hours looking for a place. And then when you get there, you're re-traumatized by repeating your challenges and having to be embarrassed over and over again. Well, that's where technology comes in. And that's something that we're trying to help facilitate in the city through public-private partnerships of nonprofits and also technology providers, that agencies can tap into that. Raphael Hollowell here at Gateway can easily, someone shows up, and then they can say, all right, well, here we know all about, where you can get your next this, your next that. And so tomorrow at noon, you got this appointment. The next, at 2 o'clock, you got this appointment. And at 3 o'clock, you got this appointment. That would be helpful. Or even if those provisions were, being able to come on demand of something like that. So we're trying to get to a technological solution that's innovative, that helps us kind of move forward versus the old system of things where, a shelter does their part of keeping you warm at night. But then at 6 a.m, you're back out on the street looking for an ID. You're looking for some food. You're looking for healthcare. And all that. So we need to, as an ecosystem, as something that we see ourselves again as this group project, and it's a continuum of care, which is why I'm on the board of Goodwill, and I was there before I was mayor, and they allowed me on. And in my interview, they said, "You just announced you're running for mayor. How are you gonna do this if you win? If you do that?" I said, "I'm gonna do it all. Do it all. I'm staying on." Because we give people a job and a better job and a career, but that's a continuum. And that's how we have to do that, Olivia. And last thing I'll say is, and I know I'm talking a lot on this, Rose, but the next thing is, those are at the lowest level of Maslow's hierarchy of need. The next level is what you provide, is financial literacy and making sure that you don't slide back into poverty, so that you can have a credit score that helps you get things, so that you can have savings accounts that help you overcome that $400 statistic that we have, that some high number of families can't afford a $400 emergency. And then you got to go to a credit card or borrow something or lose something to be able to pay for that emergency. So that's the next level, is being able to make sure we have financial literacy embedded in all our workforce development programs, like we do, right, Jenny, here at Goodwill and TechBridge. And that way you save the money and be able to do more with it.
And just real quickly, because we've talked about this too, about the number of households that are either underbanked or unbanked. And when some folks get their check, they still go to these check cashing places. I mean, that's an issue too. And I get emails of people say, Rose, how can I save money if I'm in debt? Or if I got to give 3%, 5% to the check cashing place in my neighborhood because I can't get a bank account. Those stories are real. I get them.
Yeah, they're real.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I have conversations with bankers all the time is, can you find ways to provide equivalent services at lower costs? And this turns out to be a very complicated issue, because there's a huge regulatory infrastructure that banks are trying to speak to, and they'll often hear different things from different regulators. And so they don't know where their safe space is, and they don't know which experiments they can do without running the risk of getting in trouble. And so that's something that that we're going to collectively have to navigate and figure out. But it is an important thing, and the extra dollar is most important for the people who don't have very many dollars, right? And so when you are spending extra money to get your own money, that's devastating.
Yeah.
And we need to be really mindful about sort of what that experience does to people.
Veronica?
I definitely think that's where policy and legislation and courageous conversations need to take place. Because there's a whole lot of untapped opportunity to really bring people into the economy in a really positive way that affects us from a financial and buying power standpoint, in addition to the workforce. And so there's an underlining there that needs to be addressed that I think a vast majority of folks want addressed, because at this moment, we are going through a very difficult time. You know, and there's opportunities to unleash what's there. I want to go back to her question really quickly. You know, what came up to my mind was also circles of influence. Shameless plug on my part. You know, we're a chamber of commerce, and there's a lot at the chambers of commerce throughout our state where you can plug in, where we have nonprofit members, and we have social service members, and we have small business members, and we have cities that are members, and we have counties that are members. And so, you know, as long as the ecosystem plugs into where there's a portal of opportunity, I think that is a place for us to start, where we have committees that are focused on economic development, government affairs, what do our communities need, and bringing all these folks together under this chamber vision. I think then you grab the chambers and then you create this other big sphere of influence, and we just go to town, because we could really do something together with that. So shameless plug, but you should definitely plug into your chambers of commerce and definitely join mine. Georgia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. We're here for everybody, not just for Hispanics. We are the bridge to the Hispanic community, and we want to work together with everybody.
And if we're in the shameless plug realm, I'm going to give a shameless plug. I hope you all are connected to the Atlanta Fed. Go to our website, subscribe. We have lots of material on financial literacy and financial tools, and they're free to be stolen and used. So go take this stuff and get it out as widely as possible, because it's information that can really help people make better decisions and not get into the trouble that burdens them for decades afterwards.
We got a women's conference. I'm going to go straight to your website.
All right. I believe in that no matter the room, every voice counts. Y'all can yell at me later. Maria, I want to give you a chance to ask your question real quickly.
Thank you, Rose.
She's a journalist. So,
Yeah.
you know, we got this thing.
Us journalists have to stick together. Yeah, I'm Maria Supporta. Great conversation. One thing that I heard from all of y'all, I think, and also our opening speaker, was we have an opportunity in Atlanta to fix this, to improve, to show the world, the nation, how you can get out of this. You can't change what you don't measure. The economic mobility number was based on a study done in 2014. It's a regional number by Raj Chetty. My question is it time for us to really see where we are? And the income inequality number is based on the city of Atlanta alone. And that's basically because the city of Atlanta represents less than 10% of the region. And we have very rich neighborhoods and very poor neighborhoods. If you spread it out over the metro area, we are much more like the average metro area. So as we aspire to be as good as we can be, what are the steps we need to take? And I mean, should we measure these? Do we have the capacity there? And do we have the coordinated will to actually address these issues and look for best solutions?
I'll let Keith start that.
Excellent questions. Excellent questions, Maria. What we have seen over the last couple of years, first to answer your question, yes, I think we do need to measure, update the statistics and the whole works. But we have seen firsthand as a workforce development authority, if you will, the impacts of what the pandemic and then the Great Resignation has had. Before the pandemic hit, we helped right around 25,000 people find jobs in 1 year. So it was our biggest year ever. Since that time, that number has dropped pretty significantly. I think last year we did about 16,000, 17,000 people. Still, And Goodwill, there's only 161,000 jobs that were created in Georgia last year. We helped fill about 1 out of every 10 with around 16,000 of them. So that's telling us something has happened, that people are dropping either out of the workforce or something's materializing. And then when we looked at it nationally, we were one of 158 or so Goodwills around the country. Almost all of us do this workforce development. We saw that the numbers were dropping even greater in these other communities. So what's happening that drops the demand to such low levels when employers are screaming for talent and work? Wages are up. So new data, more informed data, I think is very important. So yes, I would wholeheartedly jump in and say, yes, we need to freshen that information.
You're a data guy, Raphael.
I'm a data guy, so I always answer yes to that question. For me, I think, but Maria, you raised the question in a very interesting way, which is, what are we measuring? Where are we measuring it? Who's included in the conversation? I think those are important questions because, economic forces don't actually know where city boundaries are. They don't know where county boundaries are. They just know where there are workers, where there's capital, and where there's space to build, right? And so if we partition this too much, we will be describing a part of the economy that's not sufficient to identify where your solutions are going to be located. So we need to be thinking hard about that. I also think who else should be in the conversation? Like, is it just the city of Atlanta? Is it Fulton County? Is it DeKalb? Is it going way north? Like, how do we create that space to have a broader collective conversation about this? I was actually talking with someone yesterday about Douglas County and a lot of the job development that's happening there. And maybe they can contribute to some of the solution. I don't know if they've been asked. I don't know how that would play out. But these are the things that I think collectively we need to be thinking about.
All right, Veronica, or the mayor, you want to add anything before we wrap up our discussion?
Yes, definitely.
Yes,
on the
unequivocally.
additional data, that is an old, outdated 2014 study that we got a 4% chance of making it out of poverty to upper middle class, income and mobility. I don't necessarily know it's going to be, much better, but I think we need a new data point. And it is important to include the entire region of Atlanta because we operate as a system. I mean, each person, people come into the city every day. A lot of commuters utilize the resources of the city and go back home. So we have to solve for, about 7 million people with 500,000 people's tax dollars. So we got to deal with it.
So I'll add definitely yes. And I think, everything is being looked at from an equity lens today, so is it not safe to say that we need to ensure that's an equitable process moving forward? It's definitely time to do that and ensure that all communities are engaged in that process and that we can adequately reflect what we have here in the entire state. So I definitely think so.
Veronica, Keith, President Bostic, Honorable Mayor Andre Dickens, thank you so much for being a part of this.
If we can have,
And yeah. And can I take just a half a second of privilege, Rose?
Yeah, I thought you were.
I want to thank our panelists, our newcomer first. As president of the chamber, we were worried that she would be shy and wouldn't speak up at all. But as you see, well, she's a great presence. But both Andre and Raphael were a part of this conversation, and Rose, a part of this conversation 3 years ago. And Raphael has stepped up his sock game, and everything else is still moving smoothly. Rose is Rose, and make sure she gets the best out of all of us. But Andre did a very humble thing 3 years ago. I came to him and I said, Keisha Bottoms was mayor at the time, and I said, Keisha's going to serve on the panel. But you mayors, well, he wasn't the mayor then, but mayors can be called off at the last second. They may have to cancel to have you. Would you mind serving as her alternate in the event that she were called away? And he was a at-large council member at the time, and he humbly accepted and so forth. So I feel real good about the fact that he went from the alternate to now the dude on the stage playing that role as mayor. So thank you to the entire panel and all the folks who helped put this all together. So we appreciate you.
Thank you, guys.